Some of the unlawful redactions that have been made by Trump's DOJ to the partial release of Epstein files are now being revealed by Democrats, and it is horrifying information. It involves unlawful redactions about Donald Trump, as we suspected. It involves unlawful redactions about 9-year-olds, which we suspected. It involves unlawful redactions about other powerful men. It involves numerous thousands, tens of thousands, unlawful redactions. So let me go through with you what went down. So the chair, or the ranking member, rather, for the Democrats in the House Judiciary Committee, who's Jamie Raskin, he was given access to look through the redactions. And when he was given that permission, he's a former top constitutional scholar. He's the exact person who you'd want in the room to look at these redactions and see what was redacted and what was non-redacted. So he was allowed to see the work by the DOJ, and he described some horrifying findings. So here he is talking about Epstein's lawyers speaking to Donald Trump's lawyers. Now, all of this was redacted by Trump's DOJ, where Trump's lawyers are allegedly telling Epstein's lawyers, look, we always knew that Epstein was never actually a member of Mar-a-Lago ever. He was always a guest. And you see this coordination, it seems, from the Trump lawyers with the Epstein lawyers during the relevant time period. I want you to listen to what Raskin describes. Play this clip.
The Department of Justice has not sent forth its so-called privilege log, so it's not explained yet why there might be certain redactions that have been made. I saw one document which was an email that was sent by Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell, which was the forward of an email that he had received from some of his lawyers, giving an account of a conversation between Epstein lawyers and Trump lawyers and others about what had taken place during that 2009 period. It was during the period of the 2009 investigation. And Epstein's lawyers synopsized and quoted Trump as saying that that Jeffrey Epstein was not a member of his club at Mar-a-Lago, but he was a guest at Mar-a-Lago, and he had never been asked to leave. And that was redacted for some indeterminate, inscrutable reason. I know it seems to be at odds with some things that President Trump has been saying recently about how he had kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of his club or asked him to leave. And this was at least one report that appears to contradict.
Now, also after reviewing the Epstein documents at the DOJ, Jamie Raskin says there's evidence of victims as young as 9 years old. And as our editor-in-chief, Ron Filipkowski, says, just a reminder that Trump's former criminal defense attorney turned deputy AG Todd Blanche transferred Ghislaine Maxwell to a Club Fed, a minimum security facility, where she now plays with puppies and goes to yoga classes. More from Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin right here, the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, on the Epstein files. Here's what he describes, what he observed. Let's play this clip.
No, I think that the Department of Justice has been in a cover-up mode for many months and has been trying to sweep the entire thing under the rug. And the more deeply that I get into it, because obviously our colleagues on the Oversight Committee have taken the lead, but judiciary plays a very important role because we oversee the Department of Justice. But the more that I've gotten into it, the more I believe that the survivors here, the victims who are now active citizens for justice, really are leading the way. And we need to be having hearings with the survivors to hear from them about their experiences so they can explain what happened and so they can begin to set forth a theory of what took place. We need to be investigating the money. We need to be investigating the organizational hierarchy. There's no way you run a $1 billion international child sex trafficking ring with just two people committing crimes, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. No way. It doesn't work like that. So we need to figure out what other conspiracies were involved, what other co-conspirators were involved. And I really do believe that listening to the survivors is going to be our pathway through this nightmare.
More from Congressmember Raskin here again. Let's play this clip.
Well, A lot is riding on Attorney General Bondi's appearance before us on the Judiciary Committee on Wednesday. We believe that this administration must listen to the survivors. We believe that this administration must release the entire Epstein file, which is compelled both by a congressional subpoena and by a federal law at this point. We want all of the information to come out, and the only redactions should be the names of the victims and the identifying information. Unfortunately, they violated that precept by releasing the names of a lot of victims, which is either spectacular incompetence and sloppiness on their part, or, as a lot of the survivors believe, a deliberate threat to other survivors who are thinking about coming forward, that they need to be careful because they can be exposed and have their personal information dragged through the mud as well.
Finally, here's what Congressmember Raskin had to say as well. Let's play this clip.
Listen to Jamie Raskin, who's been viewing these documents.
Are filled with redactions of names and information about people who clearly are not victims and may fall into that other category. So I went over there and I was able to determine, at least I believe, that there were tons of completely unnecessary redactions in addition to the failure to redact the names of victims. And so that's troubling to us.
Did you see the names of any potential co-conspirators that were redacted?
Well, I saw the names of lots of people who were redacted for mysterious or baffling or inscrutable reasons.
So you see that there is a massive cover-up underway. Now, earlier today, Ghislaine Maxwell was supposed to have her deposition taken before the House Oversight Committee. And even though she previously spoke with Donald Trump's former criminal defense attorney turned deputy attorney general, and she did not invoke the Fifth several months back when she spoke there, now when she was speaking or testifying before Congress, she now invoked her Fifth Amendment to every single question, including Donald Trump's relationships with Epstein, other co-conspirators, whether foreign intelligence was involved. I want you to listen to how Democratic Congressmember Ro Khanna describes what went down. Let's play this clip.
I submitted to Comer a letter with 6 or 7 questions. Things like, who were the other co-conspirators? Who were the other men who raped these underage girls? Did she have any conversations about a deal with Donald Trump? Now, she's taken a blanket Fifth Amendment on any question. And my view is that many of my questions don't in any way incriminate her. So we'll see what she does. But there's 7 questions that I have specifically asked. And the assumption is she's pleading the Fifth to each one of those. And the American people will see that there's an inconsistency. Why did she not plead the Fifth when Blanche asked her questions? And now she's pleading the Fifth about things that don't implicate her, but may implicate many of the other powerful people in the Epstein class that committed these crimes.
Now, MAGA Republican Congressmember James Comer, who chairs the House Oversight Committee, had a different take, and he does not rule out Ghislaine Maxwell being granted clemency by Donald Trump. He says he takes no position in a convicted child sex trafficker, and now we know that these ages could be as young as 9 years old. He sees no issue that if Donald Trump granted her clemency, he said that's not for me to decide. Really? You don't even have a moral or ethical view, or just as the chair of the House Oversight Committee, that doesn't bother you that someone who's convicted of child sex trafficking of very young children is getting VIP treatment now and could be granted clemency? Here's what Comer said.
Mr. Chairman, quick question. What are your thoughts about Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer saying she needs clemency to testify before she testifies?
Well, I don't know. Initially, she said a month ago that she would testify if we granted her immunity on the Oversight Committee. And we discussed that after we met with the survivors, and they didn't support that, so we never considered it after that. So this was something new today. Obviously, that's not for me to decide. That's for the president to decide. So.
One of the only Republicans really speaking up about this, who's now being attacked by Donald Trump and MAGA for shedding light on this child sex trafficking ring is Republican Congress member Thomas Massie. Now he's calling for Howard Lutnick and others to resign as well. Remember, Howard Lutnick is all over these files. Thomas Massie says, Lutnick went to the island and was in business deals with Epstein long after Lutnick says he parted ways and even after Epstein was convicted of sex crimes. What else is Lutnick covering up with respect to his association with Epstein? Massie calls for Lutnick to resign over Epstein connections. And we know about some of Lutnick's connections now. Howard Lutnick, Trump's billionaire commerce secretary, interacted with Jeffrey Epstein regularly over at least 13 years while they lived next door to one another on Manhattan's Upper East Side, records released by the DOJ show. They invested in the same privately held company together and appeared to have socialized in New York and the Caribbean, actually at Epstein's Island. Democratic Congressmember Brendan Boyle says, you don't go into business with somebody if you're truly disgusted by them. Lutnick is lying to the American people. He clearly maintained a relationship with Epstein and is now trying to hide it. Secretary Lutnick should resign. Let's hear from more Democratic Congress members who were at that congressional hearing earlier today with Ghislaine Maxwell, where despite her speaking with Trump's criminal defense attorney and lying through her teeth, now, when she went before Congress, she invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. When she's lost at the Supreme Court, she's already been incriminated because a jury found her guilty of child sex trafficking. And now she's begging for clemency for Donald Trump. And then she said she'll help vindicate him if he gets clemency. Here's what Congressmember Stansberry says. Let's play it.
The United States government is engaged in an active cover-up of the largest sex trafficking scandal and influence peddling scandal in the history of the United States, and Donald Trump is right at the center of it. And the person who is living to provide the evidence, who knows what is going on, is trying to invoke the Fifth to buy her clemency. So let's be clear on what we saw here today. This was an effort to essentially try to secure her pardon by keeping her mouth shut. And we will not allow this silence to stand.
Hear more from Congressmember Stansberry right here. Let's play it.
Now, we have a lot of questions for Ms. Maxwell with regards to what actually happened in Epstein's affairs, who was directly involved in the sex trafficking, money laundering, and influence peddling scheme that she and Jeffrey Epstein were involved in, how Donald Trump was involved and whether or not he committed any crimes himself, as did his many associates who are named in the Department of Justice files. Let us be clear that Donald Trump is not only named thousands of times in the latest release from the Department of Justice, he is named over 38,000 times in the files that were released 2 weeks ago alone. And we know that that only represents half of the files that the Department of Justice has in its possession, including files that were used for direct investigations of perpetrators, people who committed crimes, people who were co-conspirators in those crimes, and individuals who knew of those crimes.
Let's also hear from Democratic Congressmember Subramanian. Let's play it.
Just to reiterate, Ghislaine Maxwell should have no hope of ever getting out of prison. But today, she, through her lawyer, explicitly stated that she wants to be out of prison through a clemency that this president would grant. And she is campaigning over and over again to get that pardon from President Trump. And this president has not ruled it out. And so that is why she's continuing to not cooperate with our investigation. The reality is she is a monster. She should be behind bars. She should stay there. She should answer our questions, but she is not willing to do so because she is looking for that pardon and looking to absolve any people related to this administration. So we will continue to call for this president to completely rule out a pardon.
And here's what Congressmember Walkinshaw has to say. Let's play this clip right here.
Ghislaine Maxwell is a monster. She facilitated, aided, and abetted Epstein's crimes, engaged in those crimes. She was the enforcer who threatened the victims and the survivors of those crimes. And today we looked into the eyes of that monster in the deposition. What we did not get were any substantive answers to the questions that were asked that would advance our investigation, to help us learn who were the other men involved in these crimes, to help us learn who were the others who knew about these crimes, to help us learn what exactly was said between Todd Blanche and Ghislaine Maxwell that led her to be transferred to a minimum security prison. What we did get was another episode in her long-running campaign for clemency from President Trump. And President Trump could end that today. He could rule out clemency for Ghislaine Maxwell, the monster. He could rule out a pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell, the monster. The question for all of us today is, why hasn't he done that, and why won't he do that?
Now, state regime media, which calls itself Fox, they want to move away from this conversation. So you have guests like Sage Steele. Again, they're spending their day attacking Bad Bunny. That's what they think that should be talked about. They're just trying to divide us. Like, you see what they're trying to do here? We should be focusing on the fact that the Trump regime is covering up a child sex trafficking. They want us to be angry at each other over Bad Bunny's halftime performance because that's a way to divide Americans. That's what this is all about. That's the hustle. Play this clip.
Said President Trump. So here's what Piers Morgan said. Couldn't disagree more, Mr. President. I absolutely loved Bad Bunny's halftime show. Amazing. Best in Super Bowl history? ? Theater, choreography, great energy, very unifying message, he said. Oh, and Spanish is the first language for 50 million plus Americans, Sage.
And guess what? It is not the first language of the United States of America. Unfortunately, President Trump had to make that very clear by signing an executive order a year ago. Like, that's comical. The only thing I agree with Piers there on is the creativity. I did think it was super creative, and those were actual people. I didn't know that. Yeah. But at the end of the day, this is a celebration of us and of our country. That does not mean we are racist. I see that out there all over social media. If you didn't like this, then you're racist. Just stop playing the race card. No, it is that it's being shoved down our throats. And I guarantee you, this wouldn't happen on a national stage in any other country where they intentionally bring someone in who is choosing to say, I don't care. I don't care about the demographic of what this is. So this isn't on Bad Bunny. This is on the NFL and who they choose to do business with, who are making these decisions. But it was intentional. And I love that Turning Point's going to keep doing what they're doing. Imagine, as Andrew said, having an entire year to plan for this. But it's unfortunate because even if he was speaking and preaching peace and love, who knew? Not the demographic of football.
Yeah. The other 300 million people who didn't understand what was going on. We're waiting for that.
And just to recall what Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer said after today's hearing, David Oscar Marcus, Ghislaine's lawyer, says Ghislaine Maxwell invoked her constitutional right to silence this morning before James Comer and the House Oversight Committee. Here is the statement I gave to the committee explaining why. On my advice, Ghislaine Maxwell will respectfully invoke her Fifth Amendment right to silence and decline to answer questions today, even though she would very much like to answer your questions. If this committee and the American public truly want to hear the unfiltered truth about what happened, there is a straightforward path. Ms. Maxwell is prepared to fully and honestly speak if granted clemency by President Trump. Only she can provide the complete account. Some may not like what they hear, but the truth matters. For example, both President Trump and President Clinton are innocent of any wrongdoing. Ms. Maxwell alone can explain why, and the public is entitled to that explanation. Well, when Ro Khanna submitted questions to her today to explain if she ever gave underage girls to Donald Trump, she invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. So why would that incriminate her? Why couldn't she talk about that today? You can all form your opinion. Finally, you have Trump's DOJ kicking into further high gear for their cover-up, and they are asking that all of the criminal charges against Steve Bannon for the obstruction of Congress and for his refusal to show up at the congressional January 6th hearings be dismissed. So here's what the DOJ just filed. They want to help Steve Bannon erase his conviction for defying a subpoena from the January 6th committee. No career prosecutor signed this. It's just Jeanine Pirro, the Fox host, Donald Trump's friend, who's now the top prosecutor in Washington, D.C. Government's unopposed motion to dismiss indictment. Pursuant to Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 4A, the United States of America, by and through the United States Attorney for D.C., respectfully moves this court to dismiss with prejudice the above captioned case against defendant Defendant Steve Bannon. The government has determined in its prosecutorial discretion that dismissal of this criminal case is in the interest of justice. Defendant Bannon does not oppose this motion. Of course, he doesn't oppose this motion, but we know that Bannon is all over the Epstein files, speaking with Epstein and talking about their plans to overthrow governments across the world. So, right after the Epstein files were released, Donald Trump posted photos of Steve Bannon saying Bannon's being treated so unfairly, which we all said was a message to Bannon that Trump still has Bannon's back. And here, in my opinion, Trump is now dismissing the charges against Bannon, where he was already found guilty, as a way to help Bannon, knowing that Bannon knows all of this stuff and Trump doesn't want to get thrown under the bus by Bannon. So, just give you an example of an email that's between Bannon and Epstein. Epstein writes to Bannon, "I didn't like Bolsonaro calling any association with you fake news, though I understand. I'd prefer a Make Bannon Great Again hat." To which Bannon says, "Got to keep the Jair thing behind the scenes. My power comes from not having anyone defend me." They're referring to propping up Jair Bolsonaro, the MAGA candidate and president of Brazil, who's now the insurrectionist who was found guilty by Brazil's Supreme Court and has been thrown in jail for over 20 years. But in real time, while Jair Bolsonaro was taking power in Brazil, he was propped up by Bannon, who was working behind the scenes, and he was talking to Epstein about doing that. There's so many other emails like that between Bannon and Epstein, talking about helping each other and really impacting the global world order. And that obviously scares Donald Trump. And so Trump's now dismissing the charges against Bannon. If you're like, why is he dismissing the charges versus a pardon? Well, remember, during Trump's first term, he gave Bannon a pardon for the We Build the Wall scam and the charges that were brought against Bannon for diverting GoFundMe money to himself to build the wall. Remember that? But this right here involves the conduct in 2021 and 2022 and 2023, obstructing the congressional subpoena. Bannon was still appealing to the Supreme Court, so technically it was still an active case. And so because it's an active case, they could just dismiss it, even though the Supreme Court hasn't ruled yet. So they don't even need to pardon. They're just dismissing a case despite the fact that Bannon was criminally convicted by a jury in federal court. So that's what's happening there. And obviously, I mean, at least in my opinion, that's part of the cover-up taking place here. So let me know what you think. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 6 million. Thanks everybody for watching.
The truth is more important than ever. Check out our new Truth Over Lies collection at store.MeidasTouch.com. All 100% USA union made.